I want to start this review with a question. Should all new HiFi products be made modular? And it's interesting because there is some obvious merit in it. And in this video, I'm essentially going to be reviewing 4 different products from the Swedish HiFi manufacturer Primare, because one of them is modular and it's fully loaded. And I have here Primare's A35.2 Stereo Power Amplifier and their PRE35 preamplifier that is modular and that is fully loaded. It has their Prisma streaming module installed and their DM36 DAC module installed, which is a new module from Primare. And what's really interesting about this is as you add those modules, you of course add additional cost to the whole stack or to the preamplifier, and adding cost of course will always change our perception of value for money. But if you want this review really concise, because there's a lot to unpack here, if you want it in a really concise form, well then this is a really good to look at, good to interact with, good to listen to HiFi system that sonically sounds more warm and bold and punchy than you might expect it to. I think yes, there are some Class D sonic characteristics here, but not too much. Primare have been able to change things up, I think, for the betterment, for the overall sound presentation. But as we start to get close to maybe £7,000, which is the total cost here, of course, there's a lot of competition. Our perception of value really comes in. But it's the value proposition of the modular aspect of the PRE35 that I think is the really interesting part, and I'm going to get into all of it. And I feel I need to break this review down into specific segments, as each of the 4 products are available to buy on their own. And I want to start with Primare's PRE35 acting just as a preamplifier, because I think this is the star of this show, and let me explain why. Firstly is the looks, or just how good it looks. And I have always admired Primare's characteristic aesthetic whenever I've seen it, but sometimes when you get things home, it's never as good as it looks in the photos, but that is not the case here. I really like not only the general layout, but also the feel and the build quality of the front faceplate. It's thick and it's solid, and all the buttons and knobs feel very high quality. And even the OLED screen, yes, it's super small, but it's clear enough for me to be able to read the volume and the inputs at 12 or more feet away, something that I cannot say for every screen. And it's only flickering in the video due to the camera settings. It doesn't do that in the flesh, of course. Around the back, I like the number of inputs that are available. It seems like a crazy amount when you have the digital inputs too, but if the DAC board was not installed, I think it would be the perfect amount. 2 balanced inputs, one for a DAC and the other for a phono stage, would be perfect for me, with 3 single-ended inputs too. And there are 2 sets of balanced and single-ended outputs, which would be overkill for most, but I'm sure this will be great for some audiophiles, and you know who you are. More impressive for me was taking a look inside. I was very impressed with the overall build quality, especially the lid. It's very thick and heavy. And I like how everything is laid out neatly and symmetrical or balanced where it needs to be. The transformer is impressively large. And I am no engineer, but I really can't see too much to complain about here from what I can see. And sonically, I feel the same. And admittedly, I didn't have another preamplifier here around the same kind of price to do any side-by-side comparisons. So I had to judge the PRE35 sound quality by how it allowed me to hear the different digital setups that I've been using and the turntable setup that I am reviewing, which by now I've got very used to how that sounds. And interestingly, the PRE35 was transparent and clear enough to get out of the way for me to be able to hear lots of differences, small differences in digital setups and the things that I was changing and testing now, and to hear the true character coming through of the vinyl setup. It was clear and transparent enough, but not in like a brutal fashion where it tries to be so crystal clear that it sterilizes the music. It was quite the opposite. The PRE35 kept the energy, kept the dynamism, kept the drive of the music coming through, which I really appreciated, and maybe it adds just a touch of its own pleasing warmth or pleasing tonal character to the music, just a tiny bit, but I'd rather it be that way around rather than it kind of sterilizing the music in terms of chasing down absolute purity. So that bit I was really impressed with. I was also really impressed by how at different volume levels I wasn't noticing too much changes in tonal presentation or just the way the music was sounding, which I think is a good sign of a good preamplifier. And similarly for different inputs, balanced, single-ended. I tried all sorts of different things. I didn't notice any tonal changes or changes in sonic presentation different to what I expected. So from an overall package, I think the PRE35, given its build quality, really nice build quality, the feel of everything, the remote control quality and everything, yeah, it impressed me for its asking price of £2,900. So yes, it's not cheap, but it's quality. It's a quality piece of hi-fi that you can just tell. As soon as you pick it up, as soon as you interact with it, especially if you take the lid off, you can tell that it's built to last. Next, I turned my attention to Primare's A35.2 Stereo Power Amplifier. And I don't know why I was sent a black one and not a matching titanium finish. Maybe it was just so that I could see both colours and show both of them to you. That is what I put it down to. From the two colours, I prefer the titanium. The layout of the connections on the rear I found to be a little unusual, with the speaker cable connections and the power all being over to one side, and then essentially a lot of space seemed to be being wasted on the other side with just some basic but important switches. So this is definitely not my favourite layout for an amplifier, but it's more than fine and was easy enough still to get everything connected. Removing the lid and looking inside, the A35.2 is a very interesting amplifier design, and it's based on Primare's own UFPD2 or ultra-fast power device technology, which is Primare's proprietary Class D amplifier technology. And if you do some digging on the Primare website, you can find some articles where the benefits of UFPD technology are explained, such as instant and sustained power delivery, low output impedance, so varying speaker loads don't affect the frequency response, low noise, and efficiency, so lack of heat generation, and more. The UFPD2 modules are said to get a better power supply that has custom wound transformers. And even though it's very different looking to a traditional power amplifier, which normally has big transformers and then maybe like an amplifier each side with loads of caps and stuff, but even though it's very different to that, I still found it very impressive to look at in its own right. And I was also impressed by the rated power delivery, which is 200 watts into 8 ohms and 400 watts into 4 ohms. So it's a powerful amplifier. And if you run it in bridged mono mode, then it can deliver 800 watts, which would be really fun. I would love to have tried that, but of course you would need 2 of them. And the A35.2 costs £2,900. Unlike the preamplifier, I have 2 other power amplifiers here that I used to side-by-side compare against the Primare. I have the NAD M23, which is a very famous, also Class D type of amplifier design, which has similar power on paper, so of course this would be an extremely telling comparison. And if you take the lid off the NAD, I was expecting them to look quite similar internally, and maybe there are some similarities, but I am struggling to see them. And the NAD is £500 more expensive at £3,399, so I class that as a significant amount more. And I also have here the claimed giant killer, the Gallion TS-A75, which is only a 75 watt per channel into 8 ohms stereo power amplifier, but it's a high current Class AB design. So it throws something else into the comparison mix, especially as it costs about half that of the other two. And for testing the sound quality of the 3 amplifiers, I did multiple rounds of testing, trying and comparing all sorts of different sources with the Pre and the different amplifiers, loads of testing with 2 pairs of speakers that you can see there behind me, the KEF R11 Meta and the SVS Ultra Evolution Titan speakers that I'm also reviewing at the moment, and I really like those speakers because they deliver a lot of bass, really good amount of bass, but there's more to them than just that. And of course, check in for their review coming soon. And I used a mixture of sources, all going through the PRE35. I used its internal Prisma streaming and the internal DAC, but I also used an Eversolo A6, digital and analog, and my reference Chord Hugo TT2 DAC. And I also used the Origin Live turntable setup, so a lot of different sources and a lot of different music, from big hitting hip-hop by Reason to some live female jazz from Simone Kopp-Meyer, and a bit of everything in between. And what I found most telling was it didn't matter what the source was, whether it was digital or analog or any different combination I was putting together, the same sonic characteristics of each amplifier was always still there, but I found it was easier to find their weaker points or their limiting factors the better the source quality was. I think that stands to reason. But I've got to be honest, all three amplifiers are really very good. There is no loser here. And I appreciate that sounds like a, very diplomatic thing to say, but it's genuinely the truth. There were distinct differences between them, but they're all very good in their own right. And I found the Primare to have a surprising full and punchy sound, especially in the deeper bass, and overall a more lively, fun presentation compared to the NAD, which I would say was the more smooth and sophisticated of the two. And we're not talking a massive difference here, but one that stood out and was obvious. I found the Primare to add a bit of fat to the sound, maybe a bit of fat to the bass, which made the music sound bolder and more full and punchy. That also made vocals sound a bit more full and fleshed out. And that worked really great with the KEF R11 Meta, as they are very dry sounding speakers, and I think they need a lift from somewhere in the hi-fi system. Well, that is my take on them anyway. Whereas the SVS Titans are totally the opposite. They are much bigger hitting in the bass, and in my room they can be very heavy hitting, which is just how I like it. Now with the Primare amp, I maybe found that it was just a touch too heavy at times, or maybe the bass was just a little thick, whereas that was never the case with the M23. But I found the opposite problem, that I was missing some of that fullness, and fullness of the vocal region mostly from the NAD. It was just sometimes a little bit thin, and I was missing the fleshed out vocal character that the Primare could deliver nearly all of the time. But both amplifiers did great with their timing, their organisation, their layering of the soundstage, and really their drive and dynamics to the music. Both of the amplifiers are really great in that regard. So when I look at this comparison, considering the Primare is £500 cheaper, it's given a lot of the same sonic characteristics that we get from the more expensive NAD, but just different, just with a different twist. And I think some audiophiles will prefer the NAD, some will prefer the Primare and £500 in their pocket. Interestingly, the Galleon almost hit exactly between the Primare and NAD amplifiers in terms of sounding full and punchy, but not quite as much as from the Primare. The Galleon also has quite a bloomed sound in some regards, which can be very complementary to the music, but it definitely won't be for everybody, especially if you like more specificity in your music's delivery. But that did mean that vocals sounded a bit more characterful as a result from the Galleon, especially through the SVS Titans. There was just a little bit more charm to it, and it mostly matched the other two for dynamics, drive and enthusiasm. But I found the Galleon would lose its composure of the sound, or really its composure of the bass, when I was pushing it hard. Neither the Primare nor the NAD did that. They stayed more composed regardless of how hard I drove them. So this creates a very interesting situation for our perception of value, because of course the more affordable Galleon amplifier of course seems like the best value because of the price differential. But let me tell you now, its sound definitely won't be for every audiophile, and that's why this comparison was really interesting, because the NAD shows that it's very smooth, articulate, very clean and clear, very maybe neutral, traditionally neutral in its sonic delivery. Some audiophiles will like that, but what's interesting about the Primare is it gets very close to the best of the NAD in that regard, but it's also quite close to the best of what the Galleon is offering as well. So I think that shows what Primare have tried to do here with this amplifier is, put its sonic signature somewhere in between Class AB and Class AD, somewhere in that middle region, which is quite a nice place to be. The next area of my focus was going to be on the Prisma streaming module, but really from a usability point of view. And we have already seen under the hood of the PRE35, but here is what the Prisma module looks like up close. The Prisma module adds Wi-Fi or a LAN network connection both in and out, which could be handy. Also very handy is the music streaming flexibility from AirPlay 2, Spotify Connect, Tidal Connect, and it's room ready. And all of these streaming user experiences are of course dictated by those apps. And I tested AirPlay and Tidal Connect and it all worked as expected. And Primare do have their own app, which works great for setting things up, and it's great for listening to internet radio or maybe listening to music from a USB drive. And you can use it to control Spotify, Tidal and Qobuz. And the user experience is okay. I found it quick and easy to get music playing, but it's definitely not my favourite music control app. I found navigating can be quite slow because it has to refresh full pages each time you scroll up and down. Worse for me is you can only have one orientation of the information. I always want album art to be as big and clear as possible. When I go into the album, I want there to be a list of the songs. And you can have both with the Primare app, but it seemed like you had to choose one and have it for both rather than an individual selection. And to create a price relevant comparison, I tested the Eversolo A6. And I have to say that the Eversolo app does give a much nicer overall user experience. And it does everything the Primare does and more so. And that is definitely something to factor in here before deciding if the Prisma upgrade is right for you. It really depends on how you are planning to use it. Then it's important to consider that you can't have the Prisma streaming module installed on its own. It needs to be installed with the DAC or have the DAC installed as well so that the streamer can go to the DAC onto the preamplifier. You can't go out and then back in. But you can have the DM36 DAC installed on its own and then use any external streamer source, digital source that you want to. And looking at the DAC module up close, it's running an ESS Sabre 9068A DAC chip and it supports MQA, does DSD 256 and it looks very well built to me. On the rear you can see it adds a lot of digital inputs, an excessive amount I feel. I mean, how many digital sources could someone ever have? But the USB input is likely to be the most interesting as it means you can use a computer or maybe a high-end music server as your source. But I did, of course, test the sound quality of the DM36 DAC extensively by comparing it to the Eversolo A6 as a streamer and DAC, and then comparing it to the Eversolo and the Chord Electronics Hugo TT2, so a more expensive solution. I tested this extensively, and I have to say that I was impressed with the DM36. It's a good sounding DAC. It has a good tonal balance, good timing, good soundstage, and just good general music overall delivery. So while it's maybe not my absolute favorite DAC that I've ever listened to, it's actually a very good DAC implementation for like a built-in, for like a modular DAC that you can add to a preamplifier. So yeah, call me impressed by the overall sound it can deliver. But I found a more interesting comparison was feeding a digital signal into the PRE35 from the Eversolo A6 and comparing that to the built-in Prisma module. And I was using a Toslink optical cable. And this was really interesting comparison because listening to the Eversolo A6 as the source, digital source compared to the Prisma, the sound was definitely thinner. It was definitely less immediate, definitely less energetic, definitely less kind of bold and full. So that was interesting to me because I think it showed to me what the Prisma is doing, or really how it balances with the DAC and the pre and the amplifier here. What Primare are trying to do is like trying to create this sound that has more fullness and more warmth and a bit more bold character. And it's interesting when you compare that to the Eversolo because I liked it. I like the fullness. I like the bold character. I really do. I like that kind of sound. And I think a lot of audiophiles will like that because it'll work really well with a lot of speaker setups in rooms. It'll work really well. But I found that boldness and fullness does come at the expense of some openness, you know, some spaciousness and some openness. So it's more of a focus to the middle type of sound rather than kind of a more open spread type of sound. It's really quite a distinct difference there. But like I said, like I don't mind that, you know, a more full sound, a more substantial sound. I personally quite often gravitate to that, but not everybody will. So I think adding either the DM36 DAC module and or the Prisma streaming module will really come down to one really important question. Do you really want everything to be in the one box? Because the cost to value ratio really can get a little confusing. The DAC module costs £750, which I actually think is reasonable given its performance, but really it's reasonable for the convenience of having it built into the preamplifier with all of the inputs and its performance and features, right? So that to me seems reasonable, but at the same time, the affordable DAC market is so competitive, £750 of course goes a long way in that market. And that takes a total cost of £3,650 for the Pre35. Now, adding the Prisma module only takes the price up to £4,000, so it's not that much more to have the streaming and the DAC built into the preamplifier, again, for the most convenience. But what's interesting is at £4,000, as a total cost, it's now not too far away from the cost of the NAD M66, which is offering all of the same features, but it also offers or has a built-in phono stage, and it has Dirac Live room correction, an advanced version of that. So when I look at those features for what the M66 costs more than a fully loaded Pre35, again, it throws up the value proposition there, because I feel like Dirac Live as a feature could help a lot of audiophiles in real-world listening rooms achieve a better result. So that is why I'm really glad that the Pre35 is modular, because it means that we only pay for the features that we want. We don't end up paying for features that we don't want or that we're not going to use. It means we don't lose the benefit of HiFi separates, which is the main benefit is that we can pick and choose. We can choose the bits that we want to use. We can choose this DAC today and that DAC tomorrow. But because it's modular, we can also choose at some point if we want to, or straight away, to pull it all into the one unit. And then what Primare is going to give you for having everything built in for the convenience of that is still a very, very compelling sonic and feature performance for the price. So that is really, I think, where this review boils down to. The modular aspect is what really makes this Pre35 stand out, with a really nice power amplifier. So yeah, it's a chunk of money for it, but they're very good units. Very good sounding, very good to live with, very good to interact with, just like I said in the intro. So I hope this review has been helpful. I hope you found it useful. If you've enjoyed it as well, please make sure to hit the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more reviews of HiFi just like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel.